Okay, guys, welcome back to the channel. What are we going to talk about today? The Clash? No, we're going to talk about speakers. In particular, we're going to talk about my speakers for this backroom, the main 2-channel speakers, which are modified Soundlines that were made probably in the year 2000, 2001. Company wasn't in business very long, and they probably weren't the best speakers back in the day. But these have since been modified by Steve Nugent of Empirical Audio, and then I've done some further modifications. So I thought it was a good topic for a video to kind of go through what can be done to speakers after the fact and improve their performance without having to buy retail and rebuy and constantly be on that gear merry-go-round. So let me flip the camera real quick and we can show you what they look like from my listening chair here. Okay, so I painted them black and white because, as you can see, I'm a black and white fan. This is what they look like. This is from the original ad from Steve Nugent of Empirical Audio. And he goes through the different things that he did to these speakers from their stock form. And he did a great job in terms of crossover parts and whatnot. As you can see, though, I've done some additional modifications from the footers to taking the grill off to some additional damping material, and there's some damping material on the back as well. And I'll go through a little bit more detail. Let me flip the camera back. Okay, so first of all, why did I pick these speakers? Number one, I used to go to the shows. I actually still go to the shows, but Steve doesn't really go to the shows anymore. But I remember going to his room many years ago in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, and being impressed with his room. And he was using these speakers that he had modified, and he had gutted them in terms of the crossover parts and redid the crossover. And when I bought them from him, he sent me like 10 pages worth of his calculations and whatnot to understand what he did. And ironically, when the speakers came to me, they came damaged from UPS. By the way, never use UPS. We didn't get any money on the insurance, and even though we used the stock boxes from which they originally came. But anyway, the crossover had dislodged in the box, and it had divots on it and it had been bouncing around. The air core inductor is so large and so substantial. It's not one of those little dinky little red air core inductors that you see in so many speakers. Perfectly fine, but he's got a serious one in there, and that thing's heavy. It's got its own spindle on a brace. It's not even on the crossover board, and the crossover board as itself is huge. So I don't doubt he put $1,500 worth of parts into the crossover, and I had to fix it and get it all repaired just to get it to work when I bought them. But there was a couple of things that I noticed of the speakers that were still problematic that he really didn't address, and I just never heard when I had auditioned them at shows. One of the things that's a little bit of a weakness of auditioning things at shows is that the noise floor obviously is pretty high. You don't always get the sweet spot, but even if you get those two things right, you really can't push a speaker to high volumes in these rooms because you're running the risk of interfering with the other rooms and other demos and just aggravating people at high volume. So these speakers had an issue with high volume, and I'll switch back so you don't have to look at my face the whole time. So basically what this was is a partial line source. These are a little planar magnet array, and then a bass box with the 10-inch woofer at the bottom. So what you have is basically a combination hybrid line source and a point source. So as a stock model, I read a review, and it was the first review said it was bright, and I don't doubt that, because just inherent in a design like this, line source, as the music comes towards you from distance, it loses less volume than a point source. So this can be louder than this, just due to the nature of the design. So if you don't address it in the crossover or any kind of DSP or room correction, you can have a bright speaker, and that's what I feel like these probably sounded like in stock form. Now, Steve did some things to improve them, but I still found them a few dB bright, and the measurement showed it. So I used Direct Live and EQ to tame that, and that's where Dirac and stuff like that are better than just treatments that you put on the walls and whatnot, because you can only do so much with traditional room treatments. You can't address a crossover point that is tilted up at a certain dB and change the range that covers the modification that you're doing with room treatments. It does help with the dispersion characteristics. That's another thing I do like about these speakers and these kind of speakers in general, is that it's basically a dipole that the back radiates the exact same as the front. So let's talk about that. When you have a speaker that radiates both the front and the back the same, here's the advantage you get. Most of what you listen to at your listening position is a conglomeration of the direct sound from the speakers and then also a lot of reflections. So why not the reflections that are coming out the back of the speaker be actual reflections of the same thing that is coming from the front of the speaker? So timbre, the accuracy, everything is identical, just out of phase the other way. So it's a superior approach in theory. Now, can it cause a lot of problems? Yes, because of placement issues, and then the amount of radiation going that way could be problematic. But it creates a wall of sound that is addictive if that's something that's your preference. It's something for me in particular. The other thing, I'll switch again. I like a tall speaker because speakers like this basically have no height limitation on the soundstage. You can have left, right, depth, and that's usually caused by your room and reflections. It's not even really what's on the recording itself. Mostly speakers will image differently in different rooms just by the reflections. But the height, almost in every room, will be confined by the speakers themselves, unless you have some of these arrays like this that can put a wall of sound, especially when they're dipole, that just make the speakers disappear, and you get the impression of no height on the sound that's coming from in front of you. And if that's your preference, I'll switch back. If that's your preference, that's a huge advantage for me. That's my preference, and that's the illusion I want to create. I want to pretend like I'm not listening to speakers. And what I find with floor standers and traditional tweeter, mid-range woofer is that they're boxes that shout at you. Now, they can sound impressive, they can measure great, but I never can get past the fact that they're shouting and they've got usually a constricted height on their soundstage. It doesn't mean I've owned box speakers before, and some do a really good job of integrating the drivers. I particularly like the British speakers, the LS35As, the Spendors, the Harbiths. Those do a great job with melding the drivers to be coherent and be very good, especially in the mid-range. But they have other issues, and then the height issue and that frequency extreme. So this is what I've found is the best trade-off for me, because I just need to have that line source radiation pattern, the wall of sound, and the height. Now, and then you can address the issues by this being a hybrid by doing room correction and EQ and modifying the crossover. Another thing, though, that I had to deal with, and I'll flip the screen. If you notice, this had a grill originally with cloth covering it, and it was a very thick grill wedged in between the baffles in a concave fashion, and it would resonate at high volumes. So I had to take that out, and that's one of the things I had mentioned earlier and kind of got off track, is that when I couldn't audition these at high volume, so I wasn't able to notice the fact that these baffles would resonate as well as the grill itself. So I ripped out the grill and improved that, put the padding on the back, and then the feet have the vibration control, which if you watch my videos on vibration control, you know that how powerful such things can be in terms of reducing the vibrations that go into the floor from the speaker, as well as go into the speaker from the floor from other speakers. And if you watch those videos, which I encourage you to do, I've put similar suspension on the other subwoofers to eliminate the floorborne vibrations and vibrations going into the floor. What does that do? From the standpoint of where I'm sitting now, when I sit down, let's not even talk about the improvement from the actual speakers themselves. When I sit down in my couch and put my feet on the floor, I used to feel severe vibrations at high volume levels, but now I don't. And that's a big advantage. The couch itself doesn't resonate nearly as much as it did. Things in the room don't resonate as much as they did. Some things don't resonate at all now because there's almost no vibrations going into the floor. So right off the bat, you're improving your noise floor aggravation of vibrations, other things being excited in the room by doing the vibration control, in this case, the Townsend feet on my main speakers. And then I have my homemade solutions that are in my other videos for the subwoofers. And I would highly encourage that modification to try that on your speakers before buying new ones. You would not believe the improvement, like I said, just from enjoyment of the listening position. When you add in after you listen, and look, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that something that purpose is to produce vibrations like speakers. If you can reduce the amount of vibrations going into it, and then you can also dampen the vibrations that the cabinet and the speaker itself is creating, you are going to enhance the performance of those drivers and the sound that comes out of it. And so it's very audible in terms of an improvement, certainly for a tweak level improvement. So I encourage you to do that. And so let me flip the switch one. If there's any questions that you have, I encourage you to go to what was done before they came to me. I encourage you to go to Audio Circle and go to Steve Nugent's page. You can probably see the web address up there. He'll tell you about the different things he did if you want to know. Feel free to write any comments and questions as well. But hopefully that gives you an idea of some things that you can do for your speaker and things you have to be cognizant of when you buy a speaker that can help you. Let me switch. Things that can help you before you just go out and get on that merry-go-round of buying new equipment. Figure out, go to the shows, see what type of speaker attracts you. Maybe it is the floor standards with the mid-range tweeter and woofer, and you don't really care about the illusion of height and whatnot. But make sure you try some like these. I will tell you that I've modeled these speakers off of my Wisdom audio speakers, which are in my other room, which were $25,000 back in 2000. So, and they weigh about 250 pounds. So nowadays they're charging you about $500 to $1,000 a pound. So no telling how much those would go for nowadays. And then the other speaker I modeled these off of in terms of trying to get the performance more current is Vox, which is very similar to Maggie's planar magnet, but doesn't have quite the same negatives. In fact, I couldn't find really many negatives at all with these Vox. Now, are they worth $80,000? No, nothing is. In fact, none of these speakers worth 40, 50,000, 30,000. They're not worth a car. But if I had money to burn and just money was no object, if I had to pick between YG, Magico, MBL, you name it, whatever ridiculously priced speaker, I would choose the Vox. And so I tried to get the level of performance from these to equal what I've heard at shows from them, to get that dynamic wave that you don't really get with Maggie's and the full range extension, because they're not a hybrid like these. And then I've also got the subs that these roll off to. I also ported, there's a port on the back, and I stuffed the port. So that's another modification that I failed to mention earlier. So hopefully all these things combined give you maybe some tips on what you can try with your own speakers before deciding to give up on them and move on. Again, don't forget room correction as well. Feel free to ask any questions in the comments section, and make sure you subscribe and sign up for notifications, because the next videos I'm going to do are going to be on my amplifier, where I do similar modifications and things that you may not have thought of and may help you. So we'll see you soon.